Assassin's Promise, Chapter 98, by Thomas Woodward. The man spoke in sharp tones. Calian did not like the feel, the vibe in the air. There was a tension, like the false lull before the crescendo in any truly great play. He was being corralled. He could feel it, although the man who stood blocking his way in the street would not openly say it. "Why not head back to the merchant's quarter and amuse yourself among the cafes, good sir? There's to be no one passing this road. We're on orders from Lord Asric himself." The man had a reedy air about him, something that seemed off. It could just be the stink of drink on his breath that Calian could notice from several paces. The man did not appear to be schooled in hiding his intentions. Calian suspected there was another reason that no one was allowed in. Good man, Calian said. "Now, there's no sense in what you say. I myself have an appointment with the Lord of Calyapos." "Wait, did you say Lord Asric?" "Aye. Lord Asric has ruled for the past several years. His lordship's father died of the drink. Everyone knows that. Who are you, anyway?" The officer lowered his scabbarded blade, a questioning look coming into his eyes. "Let's see your writ of invitation, then." Calian sidestepped the question. "Surely you recognize one of the great houses." Pointing to the coat of arms emblazoned on his chest, he waited calmly for a reaction. When none came, Calian's temper began to wax. "State your name and rank, man. I've had enough of your badgering. Lord Asric and I grew up together. My name is Calian Valenti." The man's brows furrowed, then shock appeared across the man's face. "My apologies, your grace. However, I cannot let you pass. I am on orders to intercept you for his lordship. Lord Asric would like to arrange a meeting. However, there are certain engagements he must meet before he can meet with you personally. If you would follow me, sir." The man began to walk forward, turning periodically to check that Calian was still following him and not proceeding along his original path. "Surely Asric can meet me in his chambers within the keep. Why all the secrecy? Are there so many demands now on his time?" Calian said. The officer frowned and waited several moments before speaking. Clearly the man had no concept of stage training and was not adept in dissembling a believable reason to him. Your grace, Lord Asric simply wants to meet in a place that is inconspicuous before inviting you back to the keep. I'm sure his lordship has his reasons. Now there I go, babbling on." With a pained smile, the man waited for Calian to resume following him. The officer's face appeared to be unused to bowing and scraping. Sweat beaded on the man's brow while he held the unnatural facial expression in place. "Do as you were commanded, then. I will follow." With modest interest, Calian wondered what sort of game was afoot that led Asric to meet him in a hidden location. Perhaps Asric had made political enemies and didn't want to raise suspicions by entertaining Calian at the keep proper. Or maybe it was something more simple. Could it be that his friend had fallen in love? It would seem a ridiculous notion. Asric had always come across as hard and lifeless to others, especially those to which he ruled over. Calian knew him better, but many of the outer truths were simply magnified once you truly knew the man. No, Calian doubted it was anything so fanciful as a love interest for his childhood friend. Maybe Asric was being blackmailed. He had a hard efficiency about him, but lacked understanding surrounding some of the finer things in life. The man had a mind that could puzzle away at complex problems, but he had little experience with the more common deceptions of the flesh. Power was all that held any interest to him when Calian saw him last. He would never see an assassin's blade until it was too late. He just did not truly see people as more than tools or pawns that spread out before him on a chessboard. He could not see past into people's emotions or personal intentions. He could only coldly calculate based on linear strategic purpose. He was a master of the battlefield, where such human variables were more removed, but that left him weaponless in times of peace. With rising concern, Calian followed the shorter man who led him through the twisting alleys of the merchant quarter. High-roofed houses, thatched in a gorgeous cobalt blue, richly complemented the red brick masonry of the houses themselves. Immaculately swept, the streets almost glowed as they crossed the freshly cleaned cobblestones. Beautifully painted houses gave way to more modest homes. Kalian could tell they were wending their way down the hill, further from the keep. Cafes graced several of the corners they passed. The spiced aroma of sweets and hot cider wafted out to greet them. More pungent smells assaulted them the farther out they moved. Reaching the bottom of the hill, poorer houses were in evidence, although not quite in tatters. The occasional beggar graced a doorway here. He could smell fish that had been left out too long in the sun. A little ways off from the docks, he estimated this as nearing the limits of protection that would be provided by the local constables. Even the poor houses were decorated, red flowers pinned to the heavy wooden doors that opened directly onto the streets from the small homes. The city was thick in the midst of the great festival. Even in the normally subdued areas, there were clear expressions of joy and mischief. A troop of young men moved animatedly up the streets, fitting in cheap masks that hid their faces. Streams of red flowers were pinned to their outfits, and petals spun into the air as they moved. The streets were slogged with trampled flowers, all crimson red. Even here in the poorest quarter, the festival boomed on. The shorter man who led him on kept looking back at him. Perhaps the man feared he would simply dash away on the wind. Kalian could see a heavy cudgel tied at the man's waist. The man still held the short blade in one arm, the tension clear in his movements. He wore no cloak or mark of station. Kalian wondered what his options would be if he suddenly decided to leave. He carried no weapon save the flute in his pack. He had relied on his quick tongue to keep him out of harm's way. Often the crest he wore was more than enough to open doors, but it did not protect him from the common footpad. His brothers had received military education from a young age and had tried many of their submission holds on him. He had managed to learn how to wriggle out of most of them. Strong for a youth, he had avoided physical violence. Many others did not have the luxury he had been afforded growing up in a noble family. What did Azric have in mind for him? Part of him was curious. The other part wanted to be gone from here. His friend had not softened over the years as they grew up together. The man had no love lost on the great plays of the theater. Kalian had worried that his friend may become like his father. But no, the old goat was too strong in his earthly desires. Azric never seemed to show any of the propensity for such base desires, other than greed and power. Why couldn't the man simply let go and enjoy a night of song like the next man? "Where are you taking me?" Kalian tried to sound casual, but it came across forced. "We're almost there, Your Grace. I promised his lordship to take you here to meet him." The man did not look back as he spoke. He moved with an anxiety that mimicked the tone of his words. Kalian stopped. After a few paces, the other man heard the footfalls cease, and stopped also, looking back at him. "Come now, good sir. You must follow me. His lordship commands it." The shorter man waited, apprehensive. Kalian made no move to follow. "What proof do you have that you speak for Lord Azric? State your name and rank." The man growled, then covered it poorly, a sickeningly sweet tone entering his voice. "Good sir, his lordship wishes it, so I must obey. Please, come this way." The cloying feel of his words made Kalian's stomach turn. Kalian's patience was at an end. "I'll wait here, then." Pointing across the street at a particularly seedy-looking tavern, Kalian continued to the sputtering man. "I'll be in there, and tell Azric for God's sake not to waste time in heading over." Sputtering, the shorter man turned a dark shade of livid, and barely bit off a retort. Kalian had no doubt the man would have preferred to speak his mind just then by the pulsing vein in his forehead. "You'll address him as Lord!" But Kalian had already turned on his heel and was no longer listening. He could hear the shorter man stamp his feet angrily. Moving easily, Kalian crossed the street to the tavern. Half of life was knowing what you didn't have to put up with. If Azric wanted to see him, he would come. It was just that simple. As he passed through the doors of the smoky tavern, he could see the other man following him at a reasonable distance. If it came to it, Kalian was reasonably sure he could disarm him. But he liked the feel of easy cover that the tavern provided. Swinging up to the bar, he tipped his head in silent acknowledgement of the bartender, a man whose work is never truly done. The thickly mustached barkeep moved over to him easily and took stock of him in a sweeping glance. It was just that simple. Downing a gulp of bitter ale, Kalian blew out a sigh, finally relaxing a little after having put into port. He wondered if there were any of the great plays being held during the 20 Days of Fire festival. He would even settle for a simple group of street players. It had been so long since he had listened to the words that tugged at his soul. Dark-eyed women had filled his dreams until of late, and his days had been a blur of so many hands of Saul. Cracking his knuckles, he itched to play a game. He could dimly hear the rattle of dice in a cup at the far end of the tavern, the dark rafters echoing the sounds dully. Smoke and incense filled the air. The acrid stink and caustic feel was a not-so-pleasant reminder of the past few weeks where he had traveled to the blinding cities of Azar. Kalian could feel more than hear the entrance of the other man he had met shortly before. The man had not given his name, a fact that did not escape Kalian. He didn't trust the shorter man, no matter the words that spilled from his lips. He would have to be blind to trust a man like him. He wasn't born yesterday, after all. Who did the fool take him for? He decided to get up from the bar, not turning to meet the gaze that he felt on his back. He walked over to the back room where cries of anguish fell just as regularly as greedy sighs from those who took their money. 2 games of crossbones were being played on either end of the small, dingy room. In the center, his eyes were drawn to a table of men playing Saul, the finest card game he had ever known. A man could lose his mind trying to make back his fortunes if he fell to a string of bad hands. He knew that debts were just as often settled with blood and fists outside the taverns as they were by those with a lucky hand. The trick was exiting at the right moment, not overstaying your welcome. He could see the man sitting across the table from where he was standing had never heard this unspoken rule, and was setting himself up for a drubbing or worse. The man was in his early middle years, with tufts of brown hair poking out from the sides of his ill-fitting cap. He looked poor. The man could clearly use a decent bath. Kalian could smell the stink from 10 feet away. The man held his cards close and laughed through a gap-toothed smile, chiding the other players, laughing openly. From the dark looks on the faces of the other men, it wouldn't be long now. No doubt the presence of the lone town militia guard in the corner of the taproom was the only thing that held the uneasy peace. He knew the types. Once night fell, one of the lot would offer to buy the officer a drink to keep him out of the way, while the others would cajole the winner outside for one reason or another. The fellow would be found the next day with his head split open and his pockets turned out, unless Kalian missed his guess. Stepping forward eagerly, Kalian brushed back an open chair, depositing himself into it with an easy sigh. "Look at my luck! A friendly game of Saul! Deal me in the next hand, friend." Kalian managed to give the appearance of a foolhardy sailor, still green enough to gamble away all of his coin before casting off from shore the next morning from the docks. He held an affable air, turning with a smile from one face to another. There were a slew of regulars here, several old veterans who wouldn't know one end of a card from the other for all the years they sat in these very chairs gambling away their fortunes. He suppressed a smile. There were a few younger folks, most likely the sons of some of the men, out playing hooky with their fathers. He could see the ugly resemblance through the dirt and grime that coated their features. The winner didn't appear to be a regular, but he had odd look to his eyes. Maybe a foreigner, then? It was hard to say. His clothes were bedraggled, like he had slept in a doorway the night before, but he seemed to have a healthy vitality about him. If he was playing an act, he was skilled indeed. Kalian would play soft to see if he could learn the man's motivations. The other odd man out was a dark-haired man in a top hat, expensive-looking clothes immediately placing him as an outsider in this part of town. Perhaps a rich merchant who had stumbled into the wrong district? He doubted it. More likely, the man had been barred from the other more reputable establishments and had to cast his net farther out to get a game. He would watch this man closely. Sleight of hand was uncommon but not unheard of, and you could get your hand cut off by the magistrate if you were caught cheating at cards in the Lord's own city. The man was either brave or very stupid. They were very commonly the same thing, he had found. The sharply dressed man kept his eyes low and to himself, not wanting to draw undue attention. It was a ridiculous notion, given the manner in which he was dressed. He looked like a stuffed peacock at a barn dance. Calian finished his circuit around the table, looking at each man in turn. His gaze fell over a gap in the crowd of men. Frowning, he lowered his gaze and saw an older woman sitting there. She was done up like a doll, so extravagant was her makeup. She shot him a glare, slapping her hand down on the table with a whack. "Keep your eyes to yourself, sonny. You want to try your luck? Then be quick about it and don't dawdle." The other men laughed a quick bark. Calian struggled to keep his dazed look in place. He needed to appear as green as a newborn calf. "Yeah, Sally, I bet you take his whole stack," one of the men ribbed another, cracking his face into a grin at the short woman. "Don't cup your balls now, waiting for me, honey," Sally retorted without taking a breath. The men around him erupted into a gale of laughter. "Now, Sally, I didn't mean..." The man went red-faced in embarrassment at the jibe. "You got the stones to sit there? You lay them on the table like the rest of us." Sally grinned over at Calian. The woman must be 30 years his senior. She looked comfortable, fanning herself with a feathered fan. The vanity mole on her cheek pulled his eyes away from her for a moment. Tipping his hat, Calian bowed to the woman. This was going to be fun. If you want to find my channel, it's on YouTube under Author's Process. Thanks again for watching.